Legendary voices in Hollywood rarely tremble. But in this quiet, candlelit room, Willem Dafoe's does, as he whispers that some truths were buried so deep even he forgot where he left them. And tonight at 70, he is finally brave enough to dig them back up. The camera drifts slowly across his face, every line etched with years of roles that demanded he become monsters, saints, and broken men. Yet none of those characters ever hurt him the way this real memory still does. He sits alone, fingers folded tightly, as if holding on to something that might slip away if he lets go. Outside, rain taps softly against the windows, and he says it feels like the night Rob Reiner first called him, so many decades ago, with a voice that sounded friendly, but carried a weight he didn't yet understand. Back then, Willem was hungry, driven, desperate to prove he belonged among the giants like Jack Nicholson, Meryl Streep, and Al Pacino. He had just come off a brutal stage run that left him emotionally hollow, and Rob offered him what sounded like a lifeline, a project that could change everything, a chance to be seen not as a strange, intense outsider, but as a true Hollywood leading man. Willem pauses, eyes glistening, as he admits he said yes without asking enough questions. He remembers walking into Rob's office, walls covered with photos from films that made people laugh and cry, and thinking how safe it all looked. But behind that warmth, there was something else, a pressure, a silence that pressed against his chest even then. He describes how Rob spoke about the industry as if it were a family, but a family that demanded loyalty in ways that could quietly destroy you. Willem says he didn't understand at first, not until late nights on set when conversations would drift into territory that felt uncomfortable, when promises of future roles were tied to things no contract ever meant. Now, at 70, with his health no longer what it once was and doctors quietly warning him about how precious time has become, Willem says he can't carry this alone anymore. He mentions seeing other legends fade away, like Bruce Willis struggling to remember lines, or hearing about friends like Robin Williams who couldn't escape their own inner storms, and it made him realize that silence doesn't protect anyone in the end. It only delays the reckoning that he takes a deep breath and finally lets a tear fall, saying Rob Reiner wasn't just a name on a movie poster to him. He was a presence that shaped his life in ways both seen and unseen. There were moments of kindness, he admits, moments when Rob seemed genuinely supportive, but there were also shadows that stretched far longer than anyone realized. Willem says there is one night, one conversation, one set of words spoken when no one else was listening that changed everything for him, and that those words still haunt him in his dreams. The room grows heavier as he leans forward, as if he is about to step into that memory and pull it into the light. He tells us that the truth is not a single shocking moment, but a long, slow erosion of the soul, and that what happened between him and Rob is woven through years of fear, ambition, and quiet suffering. He says he has waited this long because he wanted to protect people he loves, including his family, who endured the emotional distance and anger he could never explain. Willem looks directly into the camera now, eyes red but steady, and says that tonight he is ready to start telling it all, even if it costs him the last bit of peace he has left. The rain outside grows louder, and for a moment it feels like the world itself is holding its breath, waiting for the next word to fall. Beloved memories can feel like a warm blanket until you realize they are smothering you and W. Willem says that is exactly how the years after that first call from Rob Reiner felt, comforting on the surface but slowly stealing his air. He closes his eyes and describes a particular night in the late 90s, when the success of a film had everyone celebrating, champagne spilling across polished tables while famous faces like Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman laughed just a few feet away. Willem remembers standing in the corner with Rob, the music too loud for anyone else to hear them, when Rob leaned in and said something that made Willem's stomach drop. It wasn't a threat, not exactly, but a reminder of how much power one man could hold over so many lives, and how easy it was for that power to turn cruel. Willem admits that from that moment on, every audition, every script, every handshake felt different. He began to see patterns, actors who crossed invisible lines suddenly losing roles, directors who questioned certain decisions finding their project stalled. He never had proof, Only whispers and the hollow looks in people's eyes when they realized something had gone wrong, but no one would say why. One young actor, whose name Willem still can't bring himself to say, came to him in tears after a meeting with Rob, terrified that his career was already over. Willem held him, told him it would be okay, even though deep down he wasn't sure it would be. The guilt of that lie still burns. Willem describes going home that night and staring at his own reflection, seeing not the fearless performer the world admired, but a man slowly being hollowed out by fear. He tried to bury himself in work, taking on darker and darker roles, as if playing monsters and tortured souls might somehow cleanse him of his own. Directors like Lars von Trier and Spike Lee praised his intensity, not knowing it was fueled by a real, gnawing anxiety that never left him. Family life suffered too. Willem talks about his wife, how she would wake up in the middle of the night to find him sitting in the dark, eyes wide, replaying conversations in his head. He couldn't tell her the truth, not about Rob, not about the quiet deals and unspoken expectations. So he told her he was just tired, just stressed. But the distance grew, and love began to feel fragile, like it might shatter if either of them pressed too hard. He brings up another night, years later, when Rob called him again, this time sounding almost tired, as if the weight of all those secrets was pressing down on him too. They talked about a new project, but beneath the surface there was something else, a shared understanding that neither of them said out loud. Willem realized then that they were both trapped by the same system. One as a powerful figure, the other as someone who had agreed, in silence, to play along as he speaks. Willem's hands shake. He says there was a moment when he almost told everything to a journalist he trusted, someone who had exposed scandals before and wasn't afraid of big names. But fear won. He imagined the headlines, the lawsuits, the way friends might turn away to protect themselves. So he stayed quiet, and another piece of his soul slipped away. He recalls attending a funeral for a beloved actor, someone who had once confided in him about being blacklisted after refusing to go along with certain expectations. Standing beside stars like Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, Willem felt the cruel irony of it all, how they were honoring a man whose career had been quietly destroyed. He wanted to scream, to tell everyone why this brilliant life had faded so unfairly, but he said nothing, and the silence felt like betrayal. Now, decades later, Willem says the faces of those people visit him in his dreams. They ask him why he didn't speak up, why he let fear win. He wakes up drenched in sweat, heart racing, knowing that time is running out to make things right. Doctors have warned him about his heart, about the stress he's carried for so long, and he wonders if his body is finally demanding the truth his mind has avoided. He looks back into the camera, voice barely above a whisper, and says that Rob Reiner's name is tied to more than just films and laughter for him. It is tied to a web of quiet pain that stretched across Hollywood, touching lives in ways no one ever saw on screen. And there is still one moment, one devastating exchange between them, that he hasn't yet shared, because it is the one that hurt the most. The room feels colder as Willem leans back, eyes glistening with something like fear and relief at the same time, as if opening this door has already changed him, and what waits on the other side will change everything. Respected names and golden statues mean nothing when you are alone in the dark with a truth that won't let you sleep, and Willem says that was the night everything finally broke inside him. He describes being on a quiet set far from Hollywood, shooting a small, intimate film that felt like a refuge from all the noise, when Rob Reiner flew in unexpectedly. The two of them sat in a dimly lit trailer, the smell of stale coffee in the air, and for the first time Rob dropped the warm, joking mask. He spoke about rumors, about people who were starting to ask questions, and about how dangerous curiosity could be in an industry built on fragile reputations. Willem remembers the exact look in Rob's eyes, not angry, not even cruel, just cold and calculating. It was then that Rob said the words Willem had been running from for years, telling him that loyalty was not optional, that everyone who wanted to keep working had to understand where their real obligations lay. Willem felt something snap. Inside his chest, he had spent his life trying to be honest through his art, to reveal the rawness of human souls, And here he was being asked to hide the ugliest truth of all. Family life suffered too. Willem talks about his wife, how she would wake up in the middle of the night to find him sitting in the dark, eyes wide, replaying conversations in his head. He couldn't tell her the truth, not about Rob, not about the quiet deals and unspoken expectations. So he told her he was just tired, just stressed. But the distance grew, and love began to feel fragile, like it might shatter if either of them pressed too hard. He brings up another night, years later, when Rob called him again, this time sounding almost tired, as if the weight of all those secrets was pressing down on him too. They talked about a new project, but beneath the surface there was something else, a shared understanding that neither of them said out loud. Willem realized then that they were both trapped by the same system. One is a powerful figure, the other is someone who had agreed, in silence, to play along as he speaks. Willem's hands shake. He says there was a moment when he almost told everything to a journalist he trusted, someone who had exposed scandals before and wasn't afraid of big names. But fear won. He imagined the headlines, the lawsuits, the way friends might turn away to protect themselves. So he stayed quiet, and another piece of his soul slipped away. He recalls attending a funeral for a beloved actor, someone who had once confided in him about being blacklisted after refusing to go along with certain expectations. Standing beside stars like Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, Willem felt the cruel irony of it all, how they were honoring a man whose career had been quietly destroyed. He wanted to scream, to tell everyone why this brilliant life had faded so unfairly, but he said nothing, and the silence felt like betrayal. Now, decades later, Willem says the faces of those people visit him in his dreams. They ask him why he didn't speak up, why he let fear win. He wakes up drenched in sweat, heart racing, knowing that time is running out to make things right. Doctors have warned him about his heart, about the stress he's carried for so long, and he wonders if his body is finally demanding the truth his mind has avoided. He looks back into the camera, voice barely above a whisper, and says that Rob Reiner's name is tied to more than just films and laughter for him. It is tied to a web of quiet pain that stretched across Hollywood, touching lives in ways no one ever saw on screen. And there is still one moment, one devastating exchange between them, that he hasn't yet shared, because it is the one that hurt the most. The room feels colder as Willem leans back, eyes glistening with something like fear and relief at the same time, as if opening this door has already changed him, and what waits on the other side will change everything. Respected names and golden statues mean nothing when you are alone in the dark with a truth that won't let you sleep, and Willem says that was. The night, everything finally broke inside him. He describes being on a quiet set far from Hollywood, shooting a small, intimate film that felt like a refuge from all the noise, when Rob Reiner flew in unexpectedly. The two of them sat in a dimly lit trailer, the smell of stale coffee in the air, and for the first time Rob dropped the warm, joking mask. He spoke about rumors, about people who were starting to ask questions, and about how dangerous curiosity could be in an industry built on fragile reputations. Willem remembers the exact look in Rob's eyes, not angry, not even cruel, just cold and calculating. It was then that Rob said the words Willem had been running from for years, telling him that loyalty was not optional, that everyone who wanted to keep working had to understand where their real obligations lay. Willem felt something snap. Inside his chest, he had spent his life trying to be honest through his art, to reveal the rawness of human souls, and here he was being asked to hide the ugliest truth of all. He left that trailer shaking, barely able to breathe. That night he called his wife, even though it was past midnight, and tried to explain that he was in trouble, that something was very wrong, without saying why. She begged him to come home, to walk away from whatever was hurting him, but he felt trapped by contracts, by expectations, by the fear that everything he had built could be taken away with a single phone call that in the years that followed. Willem says he became a master of pretending. He smiled on red carpets beside people like Charlize Theron and Robert Pattinson, laughed in interviews, thanked Rob publicly for opportunities that secretly felt poisoned. Inside, though, he was unraveling. He began to suffer panic attacks, sudden waves of dread that would hit him on set or in hotel rooms, leaving him gasping for air. Doctors called it anxiety, but Willem knew it was something deeper, a soul reacting to being forced to live a lie. One of the most painful memories he shares is of a young actress who came to him for advice, afraid of saying no to powerful people. Willem wanted to tell her everything, to warn her, but he heard Rob's voice in his head, felt that invisible hand on his shoulder, and he said only vague, careful words. Years later, when her career quietly disappeared, Willem felt as if he had personally failed her, that he talks about seeing other Hollywood scandals finally come into the light, watching powerful men fall, and feeling both hope and terror. Hope that truth could win, and terror that his own silence would be exposed. Every headline felt like a ticking clock. He began writing letters he never sent, confessing to friends like Ethan Hawke and Patricia Arquette, only to tear them up, afraid of what would happen if anyone knew how long he had kept quiet that Willem's health continued to decline. He describes sitting in a doctor's office, hearing word about blood pressure and heart strain, and thinking about how much of that stress came from carrying secrets that were never meant to be carried. He realized that if he died without speaking, all those people who had been hurt would never get the acknowledgement they deserved. His voice grows stronger as he says this is why he agreed to sit here now, in front of these cameras, even though it terrifies him. Rob Reiner, he says, was not just a colleague, but a symbol of a system that rewarded silence and punished truth. And the last conversation they had, years ago, is something Willem has never told anyone, because it revealed just how fragile and broken that system really was. That he pauses, tears sliding down his cheeks, and the room feels thick with all the words he has held back for so long. The truth is getting closer now, close enough to feel its heat, and Willem knows there is no turning back. Beloved ghosts have a way of returning when you least expect them, and Willem says the last time Rob Reiner called him, it felt like every secret he had buried came rushing back to the surface. It was late in the evening, his house quiet except for the soft ticking of a clock, when he saw Rob's name on his phone. For a moment he considered not answering, letting it go to voicemail and pretending the past no longer existed, but something inside him knew this call would not be so easily ignored. Rob sounded different, older, more tired, as if the weight of everything he had built was finally starting to crack. They talked about the industry, about how much it had changed, how new voices were no longer afraid the way they once were. Then Rob said something that stunned Willem, a half-confession, half-lament, about how many people had been hurt along the way. It was an apology, not really, but it was the closest Rob had ever come to admitting that the system they were RT was broken. Willem felt a surge of anger he had held back for decades. He told Rob about the sleepless nights, the panic attacks, the people whose careers had quietly died. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, so long Willem thought the call had dropped. When Rob finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. He said that once you build something on fear, it becomes impossible to dismantle without destroying yourself too. That line, Willem says, still haunts him. It was as if Rob knew that everything he had done, every compromise, every quiet demand for loyalty, had trapped him just as much as it trapped everyone else. But knowing that did not erase the damage. Willem ended the call shaking, realizing that even in that moment of honesty, Rob was still protecting himself, still choosing half-truths over full accountability. After that night, Willem decided he could no longer wait. He started slowly opening up to a few trusted people, including a director who had once been pushed aside for speaking out. Their conversations were raw, painful, but also healing, as if finally naming the darkness gave it less power. He also told his wife more than he ever had before, watching the hurt in her eyes as she realized how much he had been carrying alone. It was one of the hardest conversations of his life, but also one of the most honest. He admits that his family had suffered because of his silence. There were birthdays he missed, arguments that never made sense, moments when his children wondered why their father seemed so distant. Now, as he looks back, he sees how fear had seeped into every corner of his life, shaping him in ways he never intended. Willem also talks about friends who didn't live long enough to see this era of reckoning. People like Philip Seymour Hoffman, whose struggles with inner demons mirrored the pain Willem felt in himself. He wonders if this might have been different for so many of them if the industry had been built on compassion instead of control. The camera lingers on his face as he says that telling this story is not about revenge, but about truth. Rob Reiner, he insists, is not a simple villain in his memory, but a deeply flawed man who wielded power without fully understanding the cost. And yet, acknowledging that complexity does not excuse the harm that was done, Willem takes a long, steadying breath, knowing that the most painful part is still ahead. There is one final memory, one moment that ties all of this together, and it involves words spoken when Rob believed no one would ever repeat them. Words that revealed not just a broken system, but a broken soul. The room feels impossibly quiet as Willem prepares to go there, and you can almost hear his heart beating in the silence. Legendary truths rarely arrive gently, and Willem says the final memory he has kept locked away is the one that finally forced him to choose between fear and his own soul. It was during a private gathering at Rob Reiner's home, long after the cameras had stopped rolling and most of the guests had left. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every word feel louder than it should, and Rob had poured them both a drink, his hands trembling just slightly. For the first time, there was no audience, no industry to perform for, just two men surrounded by the weight of everything they had been part of. Rob looked at Willem with an expression he had never seen before, something close to despair. He started talking about how lonely it was at the top, how every smile felt fake when you knew how many people you had disappointed or hurt to get there. Then he said something that Willem will never forget, a confession that sounded almost like a plea. He admitted that he had made choices he could never take back, that he had used his influence to silence people because he was terrified of losing everything he had built. In that moment, Rob was no longer the confident director, but a frightened man trapped by his own. Willem felt torn between compassion and rage. Hearing Rob finally acknowledge the truth should have felt like relief, but instead it felt like another burden being placed on his shoulders. Rob told him that if the full story ever came out, it would destroy not just his career, but the lives of many others who had been complicit or too afraid to speak. He asked Willem, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, to continue protecting that silence. That was the moment Willem realized how deeply the rot went. This wasn't just about one man. It was about an entire culture that had taught powerful people to prioritize their own survival over justice. He left Rob's house that night feeling hollow, knowing that he had just been asked to carry the weight of countless broken dreams on his back. For years afterward, that conversation replayed in his mind. Every time he saw Rob's name in the credits of a beloved film, every time he heard audiences laugh and cry at stories meant to bring people together, Willem felt the cruel irony of it all. The man who had helped create so much joy had also been part of so much hidden pain. Now, sitting here, Willem admits that speaking out feels like betraying someone he once cared about, but staying silent feels like betraying himself and everyone who suffered. He talks about his declining health, about how every doctor's visit reminds him that there may not be much time left to make things right. He wants his children to know who he really is, not just the actor on screen, but the man who finally chose honesty over fear. He also wants the people who were hurt to hear that their pain mattered, even if it was ignored for too long. Willem knows that telling this story will bring backlash, that some will try to discredit him, to say it's all just bitterness or imagination. But he says that carrying this truth has been far more painful, He talks about the letters he has finally decided to send to people he once stayed silent for, telling them he is sorry, that he should have spoken up when it might have made a difference. Some have replied with forgiveness, others with pain that still feels raw, but all of it feels more real than the emptiness he lived with before. As his voice grows steadier, Willem says that telling this story is not about destroying anyone, but about breaking a cycle. He wants younger actors, the ones just stepping into this unforgiving world, to know they are not alone, that they do not have to accept fear as the price of their dreams. He wants them to see that even someone who waited too long can still choose to do the right thing in the end. The air in the room feels different now, lighter, as if some of the darkness has finally been let in. Willem looks into the camera one last time in this part, eyes tired but clear, and says that whatever happens after this, at least he will no longer be hiding from himself. The truth, he believes, is the only legacy that really matters, that a quiet stillness settles over everything as he leans back, the story hanging in the air, waiting for its final breath. Legendary lives are not measured only by the films they leave behind, but by the truths they finally dare to tell, and Willem says that now, in the twilight of his life, he is learning what it truly means to be free. He sits in that same quiet room, the rain outside having softened into a gentle whisper, and for the first time his face does not look like it is bracing for a blow. It looks like a man who has survived something he once thought would destroy him, that he speaks about Rob Reiner one last time, not with anger, but with a sadness that feels almost heavier. He says that Rob was both a product and a prisoner of a broken system, a man who chased success so fiercely that he lost GHD of the people he stepped on along the way. Willem admits there were moments when Rob showed genuine kindness, moments that made it even harder to reconcile the harm that followed. That contradiction, he says, is what makes the truth so painful, because monsters are rarely as simple as we want them to be. Willem's thoughts drift to all the faces he still carries in his heart, the actors who vanished from screens, the writers who stopped writing, the dreamers who gave up because the doors kept closing without explanation. He wishes he could go back and tell them they were never weak, never untalented, just caught in a storm that was bigger than any of them. He knows he cannot change the past, but he hopes that by speaking now, he might help change the future, even if only a little. He also talks about his own mortality, about how every ache in his body reminds him that time is not endless. There's a strange peace in accepting that, he says, because it strips away the illusions of fame and leaves only what truly matters. His family, his art, and his honesty are all he wants to carry forward. He wants his children and grandchildren to remember him not just as an actor, but as a man who finally found the courage to tell the truth, even when it was too late to make everything right. As the camera lingers, Willem's eyes fill with tears again, but this time they're not only from pain. They're from release. He says that secrets are like chains, and he has worn his for far too long. Letting them go feels like stepping into the light after a lifetime in shadow. The room grows quiet, and for a long moment, no one speaks. It feels as though the ghosts of all those untold stories are finally being given a chance to rest. Willem closes his eyes, takes a slow breath, and whispers that he hopes this confession will help others find the strength he struggled so long to find. Outside, the rain stops, and a soft glow of morning begins to creep through the window, hinting at something new. In that gentle light, Willem Dafoe sits alone, no longer hiding, his truth finally spoken, leaving behind a mystery that will echo through Hollywood long after the cameras have turned away.